Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to the March edition of the Landlord Lens. This is the content collab between Property Tribes and the NRLA, and it's a very exciting edition today because we've got the biggest trending topic of the year to discuss hot off the press, and that is the budget 2021 from a landlord and property market perspective. And joining me as ever is NRLA CEO Ben Beadle, and I am your host Vanessa Warwick, co-founder of Property Tribes and also a landlord of some 18 years now. So Ben, it's this budget I think it surprised everybody on a number of levels, but I think what we can say about it is it's very clear from the budget that the property market continues to be a prime mover in the UK's future economic prosperity.
Absolutely, and there's nothing new there. It was ever thus, and I think for us a quiet budget, given the absolute pasting that landlords have taken over the past few years. Whether or not it's dodging a bullet, I'm not so sure, but it's certainly quiet on the landlord front, and that is to be welcomed. And actually there's some, I watched the budget speech from start to finish. Overall it presented as a reasonably positive package, but there are one or two things still being trailed that may still see the light of day, but for the moment I think we can reflect on a reasonably positive outlook.
No, I agree with you. I think it was it involves some very, very difficult decisions, and for anybody to have to produce a budget facing all the headwinds that the UK is facing with the COVID-19 pandemic and Brexit and so on, a massively challenging thing to do. I thought the budget actually was perhaps overly optimistic on how the UK is going to recover from these challenges that it's been facing. But I think that somebody described it as a budget for jabs and jobs, and I think obviously the Chancellor's first priority was to kickstart the economy again, and I think he's done a reasonable job in doing that.
I think he has, and again for us, it recognises that whatever the political rhetoric around housing and landlords and tenants, that housing plays a hugely significant part into the success of the country, and one shouldn't underestimate. I'll get off my soapbox in a moment, but one shouldn't underestimate the contribution that landlords make to that. Against all of the other negativity that exists around it, there is a significant contribution, and actually the government has kind of recognised that and left it alone for now. Yeah.
So one thing that didn't come out of the budget was a rise in capital gains tax. That was widely tipped as one of the things that the Chancellor would do to help to start pay for the coronavirus support measures, but that never happened.
And good, frankly. I'm pleased that didn't happen. I think, as I said at the outset, so much tinkering and so much revenue has been raised off of the back of landlords and investors over the past few years. You've only got to look at Section 24, and we haven't quite seen the full impact of that yet. That I think that is the right thing to do, and I think what we have to hope is that the measures that are in place, together with the vaccine rollout, will stand us hopefully in good stead, so that some of those things don't need to be looked at any further.
Right. So let's talk about the things that the budget did deliver upon, and I've got 5 kind of subtopics for us to discuss, and obviously the stamp duty extension. I think the Chancellor played his cards pretty close to his chest on that one, but I think it's a good thing that it's been extended, and then there is going to be a tapering off. So hopefully those measures have avoided this cliff edge at the end of March that a number of us were concerned about.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, they create 2 new mini cliff edges, I guess. But I do think that was probably the right sort of move to make, again, it is recognising the significant contribution that housing makes to the sector. And I think for every sale that goes through, it contributes an additional 10 grand or something along those lines to the wider economy. So it is important, and I think that will give what people need is confidence, isn't it? And from my vantage point, things have been held up in terms of conveyancing and legal searches and so forth. And I think this does give quite a neat window for those sales already in motion to conclude and benefit from the stamp duty holidays in a nicely targeted way, in a way that phases out so that people can work to that. So for me, that's a big thumbs up, and it's not, obviously not just landlords that will benefit from that. Obviously, the 3% surcharge is still there. But that will appeal to a wide range of people that haven't quite concluded their sales yet.
We're talking the landlord perspective. I think that some landlords may feel encouraged to expand their portfolios over the summer because of this. We were all very worried about the ability for conveyancing firms to be able to complete these sales in time. They've been massively, backlogged with trying to get all these sales through to meet the deadline. That's obviously gone away now. We can have more confidence that we've got a longer time horizon to actually get sales through. And the fact that there wasn't any nasties in the budget actually may encourage a few landlords to expand a bit over the summer because of that.
I think that's right, Vanessa, and I think what we're seeing now is actually, there's lots of talk about landlords exiting the market and the confidence in the market, not least linked to possession, and no doubt we'll come on to that a little bit later. But we are seeing more consolidation. We are seeing those people that have one property who may well have exited anyway, perhaps accelerate their exit from the market, but we're not seeing necessarily the net supply of properties in the PRS falling by a significant degree, which indicates that people are expanding their portfolio. And indeed, when we look at the members that are joining the NRLA, there are a lot of new investors that are joining. As I've said before, I think they must have balls of steel, frankly, coming into a market that is uncertain. But things like this do give a sense of certainty and comfort and confidence, and that's what the industry needs.
I agree with you. I mean, my take on the budget is that a lot of cans have been kicked down the road, and so we should make hay while the sun shines and repair that leaky roof while the sun shines, because I can't see that these really good times are going to last. They are going to come back and bite at some point. So we've got a window of opportunity to enjoy the boom if we choose to, but also to make sure that our portfolios are resilient and more resistant to any shocks, because we should have all learnt that lesson from COVID-19 for sure.
Yes, I agree with that. I think it has brought a degree of time, but one thing that I think we do still need to see, and there's lots of positive measures in here, but we do need to see this sort of rent debt crisis addressed. That's one thing that wasn't addressed in this budget. Lots and lots of generally positive things or ambivalent things from landlords. As I say, a quiet budget is often a good budget for landlords given what's gone on in the past, but we are concerned that the fundamental point of people being able to afford their rent still hasn't fully been dealt with. And I think we're going to come on to furlough on no doubt on one of our next topics.
Yeah, well, let's move on to furlough, because the budget announced that it would be extended until September now. That caused me a little bit of concern, Ben, because we've been indicated that we will be out of lockdown by June. So why is it being extended further along? Is the Chancellor just keeping his options open? Is he just helping businesses that may not be able to fully get back up to ramming speed by the middle of the summer? We don't really know, but the good news is for landlords with the extension of furlough is that tenants that are on furlough will be able to continue to pay their rent into the autumn. So that's good news from that perspective, but I'm slightly worried about the reasoning behind that decision.
Yeah, I think, look, you know, we're certainly not out of the woods, and the NRLA have been campaigning heavily to make sure that people have the means to be able to pay their rent. So, you know, we absolutely welcome the furlough extension scheme. I think the recognition around the length of time is perhaps that some industries will be late to open, and there may well be a lead time is kind of how I read it. And obviously employers are being asked to contribute slightly more than they have done as that sort of tapers away. So for us, that's good news. And it's accompanied by universal credit uplift. So the £20 per week uplift continues until the end of September as well. So you can kind of see that, you know, if you are in work but not able to work, there's support for you, at least getting 80% of your salary. And if you are out of work, you know, the welfare net is expanded, not for any, you know, not a massive amount, but it has been expanded a little bit to better support people. And that's the other interesting thing around some of these universal credit changes, actually. It is around the shared accommodation rate. Previously announced, it was previously announced that the policy will be brought forward for implementation from June 2021, and care leavers up to the age of 25 and those under 25 who have spent at least 3 months in a homelessness hostel will be exempt from the shared accommodation rate. And essentially what that means is it's giving people a little bit more money to be able to afford to pay their rent. And again, that as a package, I think, is something that we absolutely welcome.
Mm. You are concerned about what you're calling the rent debt crisis. You know, obviously we've been in lockdown on and off since this time last year. What are you doing about that, kind of in terms of a political level?
Yeah, so I mean, we weren't expecting to see anything in the budget, if we're honest with you on this. Yeah, we have been making the case for tenant saver loans. We partnered with a number of other organisations who feel the same way about this, and this, you know, this is. Yeah, we absolutely acknowledge that the government have done huge amounts in terms of trying to put money in people's pockets to be able to afford their rent. We totally get that, and we know it costs a lot of money. But the problem is, Vanessa, is that despite the extension of some of these measures rather, there is a massive gaping hole in terms of the number of people that continue to experience rent debt directly as a result of COVID. And, you know, estimates vary, but, you know, the one thing that NRLA, Citizens Advice and Shelter and others all agree on is there are a significant cohort of people that, when measures are lifted, if there aren't additional support to help them, then they will be another homelessness statistic potentially. And that really is problematic for us. And, you know, it's problematic, particularly in light of the stay on possessions and the ban on enforcement. Now, one of the good things that we've managed to achieve as an organisation is, in England only, is to get a bailiff exemption for serious arrears of 6 months or more. And together with a shorter notice period. So even though there is a stay on possession enforcement, those are the ones that can come through the net. Now, the government has got a big problem on its hands because, you know, the court service will grind back into second gear at some point. Emergency measures will lift, notice periods will resume back to what they once were. And those are active conversations that we're having with MHCLG. The position that we think would be sensible is to take some of those cases entirely out of the court system and not leave it to landlords to carry the can, and actually give tenants some short-term support to not to write off, but to pay down some of those arrears with direct payment to the landlord, so that tenancy can be sustained. Because I suspect, and our research is showing, that these are people who have a really strong prospect of getting a job when the jobs market picks up. So this isn't something that we see as being a long-term measure. We see it as being a short, sharp, helping hand. And actually we've costed it as being a third of what eat out to help out cost, if you remember that last summer. So we think that actually the government could get ahead of the game here, act in the interest of both landlords and tenants, help tenants pay their rent with direct payment to landlords, sustain the tenancy, because fundamentally that's what landlords and tenants want. It may well give rise to tenants, downsizing or moving on. But the point is they won't be able to do that if they've racked up a huge amount of debt. They won't get another property in the private rented sector. So, to have an injection, even if it was a loan over a long period and interest free, will actually, help everybody out. At a comparatively small cost. I totally appreciate that, everyone's doing their best at doing their Oliver Twist impression at the moment. But I do think that this is something that is worth investing in, because frankly, if they don't cough up now, they will have to cough up when that tenant presents themselves homeless at the local authority, and it will be far more costly.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, what has surprised me today, Ben, is that on Property Tribes, about an hour before this broadcast started, a new thread appeared saying rents are exploding across the country, and lots of landlords have joined that thread and said that they are experiencing rapid rent rises, which is extremely surprising. And the media is kind of talking about it as well. Obviously we can take London out of that equation, because London has most definitely suffered in terms of rental demand, although I did speak to my agent just this morning, because I've got property in North and East London. I've got one coming up for relet now, and my agent told me, and this is hot off the press from the horse's mouth, he said the last few months have been absolutely dire, but in the last couple of weeks there has been an uptick in interest in rental property in London. Obviously it's loads of different micro markets, so we can't really talk generally, but certainly in the North and East London postcodes where I invest, my little flat that's come up for rent in N5, he had one viewing this morning, he's got 4 more booked, and he's got 5 more inquiries from overnight. So that sounds to me like things are beginning to start to return to some degree of normality, mostly I would imagine because obviously the vaccine program has been such a massive success, and it's certainly one thing that the government has done extremely well on during this crisis. So things are starting to unlock a little bit, but it wasn't expected to me that there would be rent rises so kind of soon after the announcement of lockdown starting to be released.
So I think what we expected to see was pent-up demand coming to the fore, and I think that there's three things that have principally happened that have helped that massively. Obviously, a really successful vaccination program, people can have confidence about that, and that seems to be working very well. The second one is the Prime Minister's roadmap out of lockdown. No one's looking forward more to the 12th of April and getting a haircut than me, quite frankly. I look a total mess on this webinar today, but that does give confidence, and I think that what people have done is obviously put on hold home moves, and probably looking forward to seeing a different set of 4 walls, whether they're buying or renting, not least with some of the extra measures that have been put in place to facilitate that. And then lastly, you have a bit more of an optimistic budget. You're right. The sting may be in the tail when the autumn comes, but for the moment, this is the sort of positive outlook that people have absolutely been craving for. And I guess when you have that explosion of interest, particularly in pockets, as you rightly say, you have a lot of competition. You have the same old story of a diminished supply. What does that mean? It means higher rents. So that element I don't think is new, because we haven't seen a big influx of supply, and now we've got hopefully a lot of demand as people seek to look beyond being locked in their homes.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Ben, that probably people have had some priorities changed during lockdown. You know, there's a lot of talk of people that can move because they're working from home, so they don't need to be in commutable distance of their office. There's people, you know, wanting home office spaces. There's people wanting outdoor space, because I think one of the things that lockdown has really taught us is to really appreciate our outdoor space and having access to it. So there'll be a number of things. I would imagine that quite a few people have fallen out during lockdown and don't want to cohabit with that person anymore. So yes, there's again, I think, you know, it goes back to what I said earlier about, you know, we are going to have a mini boom, and there will be opportunity, but also make sure that you're fixing that roof while the sun is shining. Let's
100%.
move on to our next point, and this was the announcement of the mortgage guarantee scheme, and welcome back 95% loan to value mortgages. The interesting thing was that these are not just for first time buyers, and they are not just for new build property. They are going to be available to anybody, as far as I understand, although the devil is of course in the detail, and they're not just going to be available to new builds. So the government is guaranteeing these very high loan to value mortgages. What could possibly go wrong, Ben?
How long you got? Look, again, it shows that the government is putting housing as being one of the key areas to kickstart the economy and get it grinding back into gear. So that's good. But I do think, you know, back to the point I was barking on about earlier around the rent debt. To me, it feels slightly a case of putting the cart before the horse. I don't think it's a desperately bad idea, but you know, I kind of think that you've got a fair few hundreds of thousands of people that are really struggling to afford their rent. And I totally get that we want to be aspirational in terms of home ownership. No issue with that. But I kind of feel that it might have been better to have supported those that are renting firstly and foremost, and then start to have more creative plans around 95% mortgages. You know, we don't want to build a recovery solely focused around debt, I guess, and you know, 5% deposit is not a massive amount. So yeah, I'm slightly lukewarm on this. Yeah, I'm you know, pleased that housing is being recognised as being important, but I question whether it's, you know, the right policy at the right time.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing I think is that it will add fuel to the housing market, and
Absolutely.
prices will continue to go up, and I suspect in many cases prices may increase more than the stamp duty holiday helps you out in terms of your stamp duty liability. So you know, it's, to me, it's harking back a little bit to what caused the financial crash in 2008, where there was massive amounts of free and easy money. People got very over leveraged. You know, imagine buying a house now with the 95% loan to value mortgage, and then when all of these measures peter out, there's a significant correction in house prices, then you could very easily be stuck with quite a bad negative equity situation. So I think all of these measures, you know, the headlines are great, but you do need to dig down into the detail of them, and just be aware of, you know, if they're ending at a certain point, that could cause another cliff edge, etc. I mean, obviously landlords can't apply for them. I've seen a few asking, but they are just for residential homeowners.
Yeah, and I think the figure is somewhere up to £600,000 from memory, having looked at it. So yeah, look, it's a creative scheme. It probably builds on a desire to, you know, further people's ambitions and allow people to move and get access to property ladder. There's nothing per se wrong about it, but as I say, I just, you know, I wonder whether there's slightly more structural things that should have been fixed before something like this comes in. But it reflects that it's a recovery budget, and housing is fairly central to it.
Yeah, so let's move on to our fourth discussion point, and that is the increase in corporation tax to rise from 19% to 25%. There's some kind of, how shall we say, tapering it within there. All the detail can be found on Property Tribes and the NRLA. But for Ben, I think for the majority of landlords who are small landlords with 3 or 4 properties, the corporation tax increase isn't really going to affect them at all.
No, that's right, and 19% applies, will continue to apply where profits are 50k or less. So, you know, really, and the tapering goes up to 250. So you'll only pay 25% on profits over 250k or more, and you know, that's likely to only affect the most significant property owners. And again, you know, it's difficult to argue against, isn't it? You know, if you've incorporated and you've got 1 or 2 properties, probably not going to affect you. And if you're a bigger owner, you know, it will on a tapered scale. So again, you know, it was probably the right sort of thing to have a look at. I'd much rather that type of approach, and particularly with the tapering, you know, it does seem to be reasonably fair to take those out, you know, at the entry level of those profits out of the tax hike altogether. So I think it's difficult to argue against. Those landlords that have incorporated that maybe are affected by it will be a bit narked, but for the vast majority of us, including myself, who hasn't incorporated, you know, it's business as usual.
Yeah, and I think when these things occur in a very mainstream environment like the budget, in a way they're very good for education of landlords, because, you know, one of the most frequently asked questions we get on Property Tribes is, should I, you know, get into being a landlord as a sole trader, or should I go the limited company route? And once these kind of topics are very much in the mainstream, there's been an article in the Telegraph today about, you know, incorporated landlords, how they're going to be affected, etc. It does actually ignite discussion around this topic and creates good learning for everybody that's just thinking about entering into the sector. So I think we'll see that that question continue to be asked, and I think that's very healthy.
I think that's right, and I think if you put that with the stamp duty holiday that we spoke about at the outset, there will be more people that are potentially thinking about incorporating despite that rise, because the fact of the matter is, I don't think it will affect you know, the smaller landlords, whether they're incorporated or not. But the stamp duty holiday may well be you know, a trigger for those to think about incorporating, you know, if they have to pay stamp duty on, you know, effectively moving it into a limited entity. But these are really finely balanced choices, and there isn't a one size that fits all. It depends very much on your individual circumstances, and also, you know, your exit strategy as well, because you know, this is the downside around incorporation. You know, you really need to have a handle on what your exit strategy is, and that may well determine that it may even be better to, you know, stick as an individual and suck up the cost of Section 24. Interesting debate, though.
It is, and you know, it's one of those rare things that you can't really base a decision on from forum advice. And anybody that comes on to Property Tribes, we do advise them to seek professional tax advice, because everybody's situation is so different, and as you said, Ben, it's not a case of one size fits all. And, you know, perhaps now's a good time to give a shout out to Property Tribes and the NRLA's tax partner, which is Rental Income Tax Advisors, the lovely people at RETA. They're there to answer these questions, aren't they? And you know, anybody with this question, yes, do come on the forums, do ask other landlords, but ultimately, you know, get professional advice, very prescriptive to your individual circumstances, and as Ben said, what your exit strategy is. But good to have conversations around this topic, isn't it?
Yeah, totally agree. And the exit strategy is the overriding factor to me. We're not going to be on this planet forever, and we want to be careful around how we decide our exit, not from the planet but from property, and who we maybe look to pass it on to. And that's the overriding concern. You can get bogged down on the Section 24. Everyone knows my views on this disgraceful discriminatory tax, and if you don't, you now do. But really, you do need to get some proper advice on it. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, let's move on to our fifth and final point to discuss around the budget 2021. And this one, I think does represent optimism for landlords, and it is the creation of Freeports. Now, prior to the budget, we knew that the government was planning to create 10 Freeports as part of the UK's economic recovery programme, to counter the impact of Brexit and COVID-19 lockdowns. So Freeports have been on the agenda for a little while now, but in yesterday's budget, the government announced 8 of them. And this is exciting development for landlords, because it is the intention of the government that the Freeports will kickstart economic activity in those chosen areas. There'll be job creation and lots of other infrastructure and investment going on within the area. I mean, just today, it's been reported on Property Tribes that 4 giant red cranes have arrived in Liverpool as part of a £4 million plan to expand the port facilities there. So these are all good pointers of where to invest going forwards, wouldn't you say, Ben?
Yeah, I would do. And if landlords are anything like me, they would have thought, what the hell has Freeports got to do with housing? But I think, as you say, Vanessa, there's going to be 8 Freeports. There aren't any currently, although there is one on the Isle of Man, I'm reliably informed. But essentially, from a landlord's perspective, it's about bringing increased manufacturing jobs and investment to areas that would otherwise struggle to attract them. And that can only mean if you've got either properties in those areas or you are thinking about expanding your portfolio, that's going to bring people, jobs, investment, all of the things that we really want to see as investors. And it will be really, really interesting to see what impact that has on the market, house prices, rents, and so forth. But again, for me, it is a bit more of a positive outlook that we can all sort of feel a bit pleased about, I guess, if we are investing or thinking of investing in those areas.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a thread on Property Tribes which explains what Freeports are and some of the differences that we believe that they are going to make from a landlord perspective. For instance, the Thames Freeport, which consists of London Gateway and Tilbury, they are saying that their Freeport will create around 25,000 new jobs in the area, and will also, these are kind of economic areas, and it will also include Dagenham, where the Ford plant is, so that gives security to that area as well. So I do regard these as very positive, and I would urge all landlords to really look into Freeports and look at the opportunities that could be there, because I definitely think those areas will be benefiting and going up in the world.
Exactly, and it's a bit like the old example of having a tube stop added somewhere, isn't it? It automatically brings footfall, people, and stuff like that, and that's exactly what Freeports will do, as well as encourage people coming to the area to take up jobs and all of that sort of investment, and that can only mean those people have got to live somewhere. So it's very helpful, I think, to the private rented sector.
You know what, Ben? I was just thinking, I haven't heard the dreaded word hotspot for so long. which is not a bad thing, because by the time somewhere's a hotspot, it's generally too late. But you know, these could be you know, dare I say it, hotspots in the making. So definitely I would say to landlords, go and have a look into them and see what the opportunities are there. I think it's one of the most positive things to come out of the budget, in my opinion. So we're up to we've done our 5 topics. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anything else you wanted to add, Ben, before we go to take any questions?
Yeah, I think that it's sort of away from the budget now. You know, we've spoken quite a lot about, you know, confidence and, you know, moving away from lockdown and the milestones and stuff like that. There is, of course, another important date on the horizon for later this month, and that's the 31st of March, where we have a review of bailiff enforcement, otherwise termed as the eviction ban. We have the review of emergency notice periods. So that, you know, is something that we're working hard on at the moment. And I think that the mood music for me is one, it feels a more positive outlook at the moment, not least because we've had the milestones, and not least because we've got, you know, a bit of insight into investment and that sort of stuff. You know, but what can we expect to see going forwards? And I think, you know, I probably should temper immediate excitement around bailiff enforcement and so forth. But I do know that we are making very strong representations, obviously around the case of financial support for the sector, so that landlords don't have to rely on a bailiff to get possession of their property, but also around the extended notice periods. And I think, you know, the case that we are making now is that we should be moving away from emergency measures over the summer, and we should be looking for a tapered you know, move away from 6-month notice periods. Landlords should be using proper grounds if they are having to use you know, evictions and evict their tenants, but we do want to see the notice periods being less, with a clear route map to when they come back to normality, and we're making very, very strong representations at the moment. I don't think there is going to be much in terms of difference in with regards bailiff enforcement at the moment. I think it's inevitable that it will be extended for a short period, but what we are pushing for now is, again, sort of a mini roadmap. Okay, when does this nightmare end? And it will become easier for everybody if there is additional targeted financial support for renters. I am very keen it is for renters rather than landlords, because rent is the tenant's debt, and we must not have a solution that forces landlords to take loans for the debt of their tenant. You know, that would frankly be totally arse about face, excuse my French. So you know, we're pushing very, very hard on that, and we want to see a move away from emergency measures before we then go into the renters reform bill, of which we've trailed a huge amount on this very medium, Vanessa.
We have done. Yeah, more to come. So I'd just like now to invite Stacey, the event host, to join us on camera. And we've got a few questions, hopefully, Stacey. And
yes,
it's fantastic to see such a great attendance today. I think we're well on our way to a record attendance, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. So the first question, Vanessa, is, does the new budget affect the eviction process in any way?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't affect the process. It might help whether or not landlords actually need to evict. And I think, you know, what we have spoken about is greater financial support in terms of furlough, universal credit, and some tweaks to accessibility of universal credit. As we've said, I don't think it has gone far enough. There does need to be more targeted support, like we have in Wales, but not designed the same way as Wales. So Wales have a tenant saver loan, which is about as useful as a chocolate teapot, because if you're out of a job, you don't meet the FCA requirements for accessing that money, which is why only 30 people have so far availed themselves of that loan. The problem for landlords in Wales is that they don't have an exception to the eviction ban, which is something we are talking to the Welsh Government about. The bit in England is that we have some exceptions. They don't work terribly well, but we do have some exceptions. So in terms of what you can expect to see next on the eviction ban, we are expecting to hear in the next couple of weeks, because the 31st of March is that sort of big bang date where everything needs to be renewed or new measures put forward. And I think we can expect to see a short extension to that, with hopefully some additional exemptions and hopefully some additional funding, so that those that are being evicted for arrears hopefully won't need to be. But the budget doesn't directly address that.
No. And by the way, if anybody's got any questions, please do just drop them in the chat box. You should have a chat box on your call. Feel free just to type any questions into there. We've got another 5 or 6 minutes to answer questions, so please, you can ask questions live. You don't have to have sent them in prior to the webinar. Sorry, Stacey.
Next question is, do you think the 95% mortgages will result in low demand for rental properties?
No, I don't think so. I really don't think so. You know, it will help some people move and access that finance, but I don't think it's. I mean, I may end up eating humble pie, but I don't think it's quite the panacea to home ownership that some others would have believed, to be honest with you. So I'm not worried about it at all, frankly. Vanessa, are you?
Not from a landlord perspective, no. I think it might hyperinflate the market a little bit, but I think, you know, there's always going to be demand for rental accommodation. And as we've been talking about, you know, it's not just landlords who need confidence, it's actually, you know, tenants who are thinking of maybe becoming a homeowner. If they don't feel confidence in the economy, or that they're going to remain in their job and that they might have to move if they lose their job and have to get a job elsewhere, that they're going to want to continue to rent. So, you know, I think going forwards, I can't see that 95% mortgages is really going to impact on landlords in any way other than to perhaps inflate the market further.
Okay, next question. Could you suggest an alternative for bailiff evictions?
Well, there's a question. I think, I mean, landlords have to go through the proper process. What we've set out in our Renters Reform Bill proposals is that the role of conciliation and mediation could be used to broker an agreement faster than what the courts might impose. And I think any sort of compromised agreement has to be in the interests of both parties. We would like to see that far earlier in the process. There's actually a mediation pilot that we're involved in at the moment, but that's embedded within the court process. My issue with mediation in the court process is, if I'm a landlord that's got 12, 18 months of rent arrears, do you know what? My patience for mediation is going to be about that much. Whereas if it's done in a more measured way, either before a landlord issues notice or during the notice period itself, actually, you know, if you've got two parties that are happy to play ball, that may well result in a more favourable outcome than any court can impose. Because as soon as you know, people get their backs up as soon as, you know, litigation is mentioned. So I do think that there is the possibility that mediation and conciliation can be a more helpful factor away from evictions. But you know, it does depend on both parties engaging in that process.
Yeah, I would add, Ben, as well, that let's not underestimate the cost of stress and anxiety that landlords will experience if they are in a big rent arrears situation. I don't think you can put a price on peace of mind. So, you know, we have this a lot on property tribes. People are saying they've got a tenant in rent arrears, shut off communication, move their partner in, you know, all sorts of really, really challenging situations for landlords. And, you know, I put a price on peace of mind, and I may not be popular saying this, but, you know, one of the things you can do is write off the rent arrears and say to the tenant, I will incentivize you to leave and surrender the tenancy, because that ultimately will allow you to relet the property and put this very stressful situation behind you. And that's got to be worth something in my book.
Agreed.
Next question is, does the 130% allowance for capital affect or benefit landlords, do you think?
Not that I can see at the moment. Where we think there could be an interesting opening here is around, you know, whether or not the same sort of methodology could be approached to green expenditure on properties. Because, you know, if you can do it for one area, we all know the government is hell-bent on, and, you know, quite rightly to be fair, of, you know, improving energy efficiency in homes, and the general you know, energy direction of travel is, you know, quite a high bar. I think there are some things that could be done along the same lines to give green expenditure the same sort of relevance, but as it stands, I don't think that landlords will benefit from that as far as I can see. Vanessa?
No, well, obviously, again, the devil is in the detail, but I can't see it. It's really for businesses that want to invest in, you know, plant machinery and different things like that. It's for landlords who are renting out and, you know, not in other areas like development where there may be some opportunity. I'm not sure yet, but certainly just for your bog standard buy-to-let landlord, it's not going to be applicable, in my opinion.
Should we take one more question, Stacey, if there is one?
Yeah, last one. Is there anything more that you could add to the 95% scheme on top of what you've already said?
Oh, can't remember what we've already said. My understanding is that it's not just available to first-time buyers; it's more widely open than that, and that I think the threshold is £600,000. Vanessa, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
Yes, I have actually. Just a minor point, some of the big banks have come out today saying that they are going to participate in it, and I believe, I need to double check, but I think it's Barclays have actually reduced their rates across all of their products today, only by a very small amount. But, you know, it's quite interesting that they've done that as almost like a response to the budget. So that's what I can add. But, you know, definitely they're not going to be available to landlords, so don't get your hopes up there. These are for owner occupiers, and the way that we might benefit, as we've been saying, is that it could add a bit of fuel to the property market and help maybe help prices remain robust or even push them up a little bit, but otherwise it doesn't have much consequence for landlords. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the Landlord Lens budget special. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Stacey for bringing in the questions. We've got another one next month, Ben, and it's great to have these on such a regular basis, on a monthly basis, because our sector is so volatile. It is changing all the time, and the most up-to-date information is always the most valuable for anybody in any kind of business, and landlordism is no exception, is it?
No, and in some respects it's more important, because in other business you have slightly more stability. You don't have the moving goalposts that we have in the private rented sector. So, you know, next month we're probably going to be talking about what the bailiff possession rules are, what the notice periods are, what exemptions to those notice periods are, and other bits and pieces as well. So, you know, there's a huge amount to keep up to date with.
That's one thing we don't have a problem with, is it, Ben? Finding things to talk about. Always
Indeed.
something going on.
Well, quite success might look like where we don't need to do one of these and we can go to doing them quarterly, but I suspect that won't be anytime soon.
Okay. Well, as I say, thank you to everybody for joining us. We hope you've got some value from the discussion we've had during this Landlord Lens, and that you will make a date to join us in April. We'll be announcing the date and opening the registration very soon, so check NRLA and Property Tribes for that. And if you want to have a look at this recording, it will be on Property Tribes in a matter of hours, and also you can check the NRLA as well. They will have a recording of it. But for now, Ben, lovely to see you, and thank you very much for joining us as always. And we'll say goodbye and see you in April. But for now, it's goodbye from myself and goodbye from Ben.
Cheerio, folks.